Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa Marie and Joji. Welcome back to the Deconstructed Woman podcast. So recently I came across an article that I shared with Joji about the fact that research is showing to some degree that individuals in their as young as their late to middle 20s are showing an increased rate in heart attacks. And so the article cites four specific things that they think contribute to this. And we're going to talk about each of them, stress being one of them, which is no surprise to many of us. But we wanted to kind of sit back and talk about why do we think this is happening for individuals earlier in life? The article starts off talking about how an individual, I think she was 26, and when the paramedics came, she said she thought she was having a heart attack, and they kind of dismissed it because of the fact that she was still young. But we're actually seeing an uptick, an increase in this. And so, Joji, I know that you have pulled up the article. So tell us a little bit about the actual title of it, and then we'll kind of dive in.
Okay, this is in Yahoo Life, and the title is Heart attacks in young people are rare, but rates are rising. Experts point to four possible reasons. And the author is Natalie Rahal, and this was published just recently, October 2nd, 2024. And so the introduction is exactly what Alyssa said. It's about a young person who calls 911 and they don't believe her because of her age. But they are saying, the article goes on to say that the young adult heart attack rate has risen by 2/3 in 4 years. And really, the fact that it's just a trend that people are seeing among ages 18 to 44. And that's what this data is coming from 2019 to 2023. And the first thing that they cite on here is obesity rates continue to rise. And which I found interesting, as I told Alyssa before we jumped on, because one of the other data points I've seen recently is that the number of people for diabetes or for weight loss that are on Ozempic or other medications like that has actually shown a decrease in obesity. And so that sort of seems to be maybe happening parallel, but the two authors didn't talk to each other. So it sort of seems contradictory, but I can see how both of them could be consistent and accurate given the other three reasons why this article cites, which we'll get into. But I wanted to ask Alyssa about her thoughts about obesity and if, what you think about sort of obesity being on the rise versus Ozempic and all the other medications that people are using to manage weight loss.
Well, I think that obesity has always been kind of it's an interesting concept. So I know that we've talked about when we talked about body image in the past and things like that, they measure obesity by the BMI. And I have a problem with the BMI, and I've made that clear, I think, in past episodes. But I think that, being an individual who has always been told that I'm obese, I think that it doesn't take into consider as much factors as it should, or that it should be kind of considered in that. And I don't know. I do I can say that of like if I'm just taking an anecdotal, Lucy's here with me, so she might chime in as well. I think that if I look at the people around me, I've had quite a few friends who have done bariatric surgery, who are on the medication to lose weight. Other people have attempted to lose weight in different various ways. But I do see a pretty big push for people now entering in their 40s to really say, okay, now I need to, look at where I'm at physically. Maybe, if you were, your 20s and 30s were for child rearing, and, now it's kind of turning the tables and saying, okay, what about my health? And, 50, 60 is not that far off anymore. And so I think that there is more awareness of it, but I don't know. I mean, without you know, the I want to say the research to back it, it's hard to know if that's a something that's rising right now.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like, I was listening to a podcast. I was introduced to a podcast called Zoe, and it's a nutritional podcast that does a lot of research on different topics. And I was listening to one that really focused on over like processed foods and how that impacts weight gain and things like that, as well as inflammation and GI health, which I have those issues. And so I think that a lot of obesity is tied to just the food choices that we make. And I remember as a busy working mom, we would eat just whatever was easy to get on the table. I wasn't really thinking about fresh food or uh, cooking things from scratch because I didn't really have the time to do that. And so, really, it was just about, frozen foods that I could reheat or just meals that were frozen that I could pop into the oven or something. I mean, it wasn't until, my daughter said, "Mom, are we like, do we have to have frozen food every night?" And I was just like, "Oh, well, what else am I going to do?" Like, I don't know. And I wasn't really a slow cook, like using the slow cooker, and the Instant Pot wasn't back then. And so everything just seemed like, if I'm rushing home from work and I'm the main person getting meals together, then it's all on me to get things out as quickly as possible. So I think that there's also obesity, not because anybody is just sitting around eating, potato chips and bonbons all day long, but really just the fact that we're rushing around and the meal planning is disrupted and we go to what's easy and quick because we have such little time with our kids if we're both working, that you want to maximize your time and not spend an hour cooking dinner and then take that time away from your kids. So I think that obesity is a really complicated topic. And I do think that I face the same trend that you're speaking of, Alyssa, which is that in my 40s, I was really thinking about, all the baby weight that I was still carrying around, even though I only had one child. And the fact that, that now that she was a little bit more independent, that I could see, okay, now I've got to focus on myself. I do think that it's a natural progression because you start realizing how quickly, your 20s and 30s have passed you by, and now you're looking at the second half of your life. And so it does definitely get to that. If you're ready, I can switch to the second indication or the second trend that they talk about.
Yeah, I think we can move on to that one.
So the second thing that they identify is COVID may have fueled a further increase in premature heart attacks. And so it really talks about the unknown conditions that have correlated with long haulers and just how new trends with COVID are being discovered all the time. And cardiovascular system is definitely one that is showing up now that COVID is being studied more intensely about what all body systems have been impacted, because now that the crisis is over, they're continuing to see residual health conditions that are popping up, and a lot of young people that may have, not taken precautions or whatever, because it was really focused towards the elderly when it first came out, that they might, now be discovering sort of the side effects of long haulers and how it affected them. And so they do quote the statistic that during the first 2 years of the COVID pandemic, there were 30% more heart attack related deaths than would be expected among people between the ages of 25 and 44. And so that's the data that they use to, create this phenomenon and wrap that up. So what are your thoughts about that, Alyssa, about COVID and its connection to heart attacks? I personally haven't known anybody who's had significant heart issues as a result of COVID. Do you know people like that?
No, I don't think that I know anyone personally. I think that this is probably one of those things that like time will tell. Like I don't know that we know what we know just yet. I think it's an interesting thing. I definitely think that I also don't know anyone who's had long COVID. I mean, we've had COVID a couple of different times, and each time it seemed a little bit less problematic than the time before because we're actually getting like full acclimated to like, okay, this is what COVID is, and this is how you deal with it. And I think every year it just changes how we approach it. But I don't know anybody who that has happened to either, and I think that it's interesting. I mean, I think that we can probably blame COVID for quite a bit of things. I think of the 4 items, this is the one that I was least like, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense," or, I see the connection. I think that it's just like, well, I think obesity is definitely a contributing factor. I mean, we hear that message so much so like, hey, you gotta lose weight, your rate of potential heart problems or heart failure in the future is coming down the pipe. So I mean, I don't say it so flippant. I mean, I think that, it's just something that we hear so frequently that it kind of becomes like a slogan of like this is what potentially can happen. But COVID, I think that time will tell what that's going to look like. And I think that for many of us, this was the first pandemic that we've been experiencing, even though pandemics have happened throughout human existence. So, again, I think that they're going to say, it impacted us in a lot of different ways.
As you were talking, I was thinking about the fact that I do know several people personally who have had long haulers. I would say it's a pretty good split between younger people and older people. So there were some people, especially on the West Coast, that I know that had long haulers that were very young, and they've had a lot of health issues that mostly rested in their respiratory system. But then as time goes on, there is more of an overlap between, because I think they're all co-located, like the lungs and the heart are close to each other, that they are sort of keeping an eye on any kind of heart weakness or things like that that could happen. And then the elderly people that I know that have long haulers, it's not even really even elderly. I mean, I think it's I would say like 60 and above. People who thought that they didn't have long haulers, who now are having a consistent cough, and that is being now tied back to COVID and the experiences. And there was a recent article I saw on my phone about some research that Northwestern Medicine is doing with pulmonology and COVID, and just finding out that long haulers, that definition is sort of being generalized to people that are just having almost unexplained respiratory issues, but COVID is the only common amongst these groups of people. And I do have a very close friend of mine who is in that same boat, that she's had COVID twice, not that big of a deal. And she traveled out of the country. She came back. She developed a cough. It had nothing to do with COVID. But then she was referred to a pulmonologist after not being able to shake it, being put on an inhaler, which she had never been on before, and then was diagnosed with reactive airway disease. And when she went to see the pulmonologist for the first time, because there was a wait to see the pulmonologist, he said that they are really correlating it with COVID, even though they didn't identify these individuals as having long haulers at the time. So they didn't meet the classic definition of long haulers during the height of the pandemic, but now they're tying it back because the correlation with having COVID, because most of us have had COVID at least once, that seems to be the one variable that seems to be consistent, and maybe some worsening of symptoms as time goes on. But the more to come, I think, with the future in terms of what that, as we gather more data. And because I mean, as you mentioned, the pandemic is relatively new to us. We're only, really 4 years past COVID. So I think it's a little early to draw some significant conclusions about it. And it seems like things are still emerging. So, number three in this is that younger men are lost to the healthcare system. And what that really talks about is the fact that, I mean, in general, people in their 20s and 30s sort of see themselves as being invincible and don't necessarily think that they need excuse me, healthcare. And men are more likely than women to not follow up with medical care. Women, who may want to have, are required to have, PAPs after they turn 18 or 25 or whatever the new guidelines are. Whereas with men, a lot of their physical conditions that you get concerned about really hit after, I would say, 45, 50 years old. And so they were just saying that men could be at greater risk for heart attacks given the fact things are happening younger, but that it won't be discovered. Whereas a woman, if she was to go to her gynae and report some issues, that there might be additional work that the gynae does, on cholesterol or things like that, that a man may not be able to do. So, what are your thoughts about that? You're married to a man in this age range. So, do you think that, that is something that you find with your husband's aged people, men, and his friends or what? Or do you feel like it's a little bit all over the place?
Well, I mean, I have a small sample to pull from, but I would say that one of the things that we have, that my husband has, is that for our insurance, we have to get physicals every year to avoid like an extra fee on our medical insurance. So I don't know how many companies do that, but that actually forces us to, at least get a physical every year. And then, he has quite a few family members who have passed away or been diagnosed with cancer. And so he's very diligent about doing his annual checkups, making sure if there's something that's standing out to him as abnormal, he kind of goes right away. I think he's a really good example. I actually think myself outside of the physical, like being required to do the physical, I don't. I try to avoid doctor's appointments as much as possible. So I'm I'm probably like the bad example of that, but it's just one of those things where I I diligently make sure all my children go to all their appointments, but when it comes to me, and maybe that's part of it too. And I know we're talking about men, but I think that in general, a lot of times if we're not focused on us, we tend to put ourselves to the wayside. So I think that it's from the small sample that I have being my husband and his friends, they're all pretty diligent about going to the doctor and making sure that they do their yearly checkups. But I can see a lot of men who maybe are single, or, I mean, we've talked about like, men being single later on in life and what that does. And so, if there's nothing really encouraging them to take care of themselves, that's just one more thing I have to put on my calendar and do. And so again, maybe they're more like me and avoiding it. I can see it going either way, but I think that, I think that if we're looking at the full range of like 20s and 30s, like you were saying, I don't think that that's as common then. But I definitely think as you get into like your 40s, 45, 50, where routine colonoscopies come into play, there's a lot of things that are, mandatory. I don't know if it's called mandatory. I'm sure it's not mandatory across the board, but are recommended by medical professionals to do screenings. I think those happen more in your 40s.
Yeah, for sure. The one thought I had was you were speaking is that I know that being a working mom, and I think that as moms, we want to be at the children's appointments. And so even though you were working, I know that you took off a lot of time to when you had sick kids. And so then you probably are, more likely not to make an appointment for yourself during the week so that you can save up any sick time for your own children instead of yourself. So I definitely could see that happening to you because I know that you want to be with the kids if they have and I think it's just natural that, there are times that I feel like, and, my husband would probably say, well, no, you probably think you're the only one who can do it right, which is also true. I want to be there to make sure that all the points are covered. I'm like that now with my dogs. Like my dog needs to go to the vet. And I'm like, oh, I really feel like I should be there. And he's like, yes, because you're the only person who's going to, ask all the questions. And then he does feel like I set him up for failure too. Like sometimes he'll say, well, I can't read your mind, so I don't know what you want to ask, but I know I'm going to not ask all the questions you want. So I sort of feel like there's a little bit of that, which even with my dogs, let alone my child. So I think more than anything, it might be just the fact that you're protecting your time for when you need it with the kids. You don't have to agree or disagree, but I thought of that while you were speaking too, just in the position you are. And the fourth thing that they mentioned was smoking, diabetes, periods of stress, unique risk factors for young women. And so the article says that the rise in heart attack rates has been steepest among young women. And so they said that between 1995 to 2014, research suggests that hospitalizations for heart attacks in women between ages 35 and 54 rose from 21 to 31%, according to one study. And so, I mean, if you think about it, smoking rates have increased for women, in the last 10 years. So women are definitely, if you look at the population of new smokers, they tend to be women. I know that just because it's shocking to me when I see those statistics. Diabetes, I think that, is pretty much, I think, across the board with men or women, and stress. And we've talked a lot about women and either the way that men and women handle stress differently or the fact that we as women take on more stress because we're responsible for the home and children and we're working outside the home as well. And so, Alyssa, I know you have thoughts about this. And so I'll give you the mic for this.
Well, I mean, I think that the stress part resonates with me, and I think that that's, like, an area that I mean, like I said, of the 4, items that they're citing are possibly, contributing to higher heart attacks. I mean, stress, I think, is probably, up there, not just for heart attacks, but just for medical ailments in general. I mean, I think that there's just so much that it can do to your body, and I know for me, like, I can just feel it, like I had told you I'm a little bit under the weather, and I have this, like, tickle in my throat, and I'm just like, "Oh, I need to rest," but at the same time, part of me is like, "No, I gotta, manage all this," and then I'm a yeller, and so I'm yelling, and I'm like, "Oh, I'm not gonna have a voice tomorrow because, all the yelling and stress and things like that." And so I think that, I mean, that's just like a small example of what they're talking about, but I think that it genuinely does have impact on younger people. And I don't think that I'm sitting here saying, well, younger people have more stress than, older generations or younger even than us. I think that there is just a lot more around us that's contributing to all of this. So I think that the smoking, I mean, I was just talking to the kids the other day and they were like, I don't remember what they were talking about, something like an advertisement. And I was thinking, well, there's not really, like, people don't smoke anymore, do they? And then to hear that, yeah, no, it still happens in a maybe even increased rate surprises me because we know the impact of that. Like, we know that has a pretty negative impact on your body, including, potential cardiac problems. So it's surprising to me, but at the same time, I mean, we do a lot of things that are not good for ourselves, like you were saying, eating out, fast food, convenient eating, not exercising, not taking care of ourselves. I mean, it makes me think of the movie Wally, which is like such a random reference, but I mean, essentially, for those who haven't seen Wally, all the human beings get incredibly obese because they have just technology at their fingertips. And so they no longer need to walk or do much of anything. And so they just, become like their ability to walk declines because they don't even know that they can. And so I think that's just such an interesting concept, but one that, as technology grows, do our ability to take care of ourselves is that lesson. That might be a whole nother topic, but that's what came to mind when I thought of this.
Yeah. The other thing that this article talked about was the fact that they've seen women start smoking and vaping when they go to college, and they use it as a form of weight control. And so they tied those two together because there is the what is it, the freshman 15, and I know that a lot of moms and I know a lot of girls who that's something that I started hearing about after my daughter went to college. And it wasn't something I heard about when I was in college, almost 3 decades ago. But at the same time, it's like now I'm hearing about it. And the fact that they talk about this article is speaking to the fact that college age girls are using or college age women are using cigarettes or vaping or e cigarettes as a form of weight control. That's astounding to me. And I will say, Melissa, be careful because I live right by the high school and I see a lot of kids smoking. And so it definitely is something that younger kids are doing a lot more than like adult men. I mean, I think adult women outpace adult men. And I think that boys and girls under the age of 18 is one of the fastest demographics right behind women. And so it's interesting that, you know, I think we all grew up at a time where we knew that smoking wasn't good for you. And yet when I see kids smoking and even, people very close to me started vaping and it's like, why are you vaping? This is not good for you. And it's just such an accepted behavior, yet it's so addictive too that it just before they know it, they're spending a fortune on vaping and just to have, something in common with their friends or whatever. I'm not exactly sure, but I never thought I would see as many people vaping as I do. It astounds me.
I was gonna jump in because I'm thinking, "Oh, I must be showing my age," because I wasn't even thinking of vaping. I was thinking of just, like, regular cigarette, because I think that I don't know, I mean, I don't hear of a lot of people or see a lot of people, like, going and buying cigarettes, but vaping is huge, and I don't know why in my mind I separated them 2, so I guess, in some ways, maybe I'm showing my age, like I said, because I was thinking those 2 are separate, but they really both have, damaging effects.
Yeah. And I will say that too, sort of to wrap this conversation up, the article goes on to say, what can you do to reduce your risks of a heart attack at younger ages or any age, probably? This applies to every age. Eat better, of course, consume fresh foods, including fruits and vegetables, minimize the amount of packaged food. I guess they talk about that as well. Be more active is number 2, which is good for you at any time. Quit tobacco. So, just what we talked about, don't smoke. E-cigarettes are the same. Vaping is the same. Smoking cannabis is the same. So even though cannabis has become legal for recreational use, it is a form of smoking. It can do a lot of damage to individuals and definitely cardiovascular and respiratory issues. Get healthy sleep. So I think that we're continuing to learn how important getting good sleep and the right amount of sleep is for all people because your brain recharges overnight and also reduces the toxins in your brain. And so, which, leads to plaque and dementia and all those other kinds of things. So, sleep is really important. And, sort of the mixed message about alcohol don't, overindulge in alcohol because a very small portion can help you with cardiovascular health. But then at the same time, too much, you can slip into too much very quickly and then the health benefits are really erased from that. And so, manage your weight. As we talked about obesity and things like that, the more you can find the healthy weight for you and focus on nutrition, not necessarily, a healthy, not only your weight, but also eating healthier. And then to what Alyssa had said, get a physical done that includes cholesterol, blood sugar, and blood pressure checked. One of the things that the article said, especially for men, is that because they don't go get medical appointments taken care of, there's high levels of diabetes and high blood pressure that go undiagnosed until it's too late and they've already done damage. And so those are 2 things that can escape you unless you are really paying attention or you have a family history of it and you're keeping your eyes on it, as Alyssa mentioned. So that is the full article. And I know we don't usually do a lot of health focused, but I think it's an interesting concept. And it's always unfortunate to me when serious health conditions start attacking younger and younger people because you're supposed to really not have any health concerns when you're younger and live your life to the fullest. And then, we sort of expect our body to age and to take a toll on us over time. I don't think anybody wants in their 20s and 30s and 40s to have serious health issues or chronic conditions that start that young, and then you'll have them for 30, 40 years. I don't think anybody wants to look forward to that. Alyssa, before I close this out, do you have any final thoughts?
No, I mean, I appreciate just opening up this conversation and, hopefully if somebody's out there and thinks, oh yeah, I should probably make that appointment, know that you're not alone, that it's not, not everybody jumps at the idea of having a physical each year. But maybe that's a place to start. So making that appointment and going from there might be the difference between, catching something early and not. So thank you, Georgie, for this conversation, and we'll talk soon.
So, yeah, one thing I will say coming from an outpatient medical practice is Don't wait a lot longer for the end of the year to get your physical done if you haven't done it yet, because the end of the year is very busy for people who want to get their flex spend in, or they've met their deductible. They want to use a lot of other health benefits and get screenings done and things like that. So a lot of places are finding, 8 to 10 weeks out to make appointments for the end of the year. So please schedule that appointment, as Alyssa was talking about. If you're thinking about doing it, do it sooner than later, because the end of the year will be here before we know it. So for Alyssa, Marie, and Joji, thank you so much for listening. We've seen greater participation on the Facebook page, which we really appreciate your thoughts and your comments. I'm trying to do like a pulse survey on the topic that we've recently published, to get people more involved and to create an environment where people can share their ideas. And so thank you for listening as always, and reach out to us either through the Facebook page, through the podcast platform where you listen to us. You can always reach out to us through that medium, as well as reach out to one of us if you know us. So thank you again. And until next time, we'll talk soon. Bye. Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you liked this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions, or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.